Okay, we're going to work some problems in the exercises in the chapter, first chapter 13, which is the E&P and the distributions. So this one is a little complex, so I'm putting it on its own video, and then I have a second demo video that has several others that are not quite as deep. It's not really hard. It's just you have to apply all these rules about E&P and the ordering of it, and it does not all of them. It's just it does explore some of the ordering issues. And so I'm going to go ahead and work through this one, and we'll see where we come out. All right. So on January 1st of the current year, Rondell Corporation holds E&P accumulated at $13,000. Current E&P for the year is $84,000, both positive, which is good, right? So we think, oh, good. Maybe we won't have to worry about how to characterize these distributions. We'll know they're going to be dividends because we have E&P current and E&P accumulated. So that's usually the truth. But sometimes a distribution is higher than even those two positives. So we have to look at it and just see. All right. And then we have another little kink in this one. All right. So this $84,000 for the current E&P is assumed to be earned evenly throughout the year. And Elizabeth and Jonathan are the sole equal shareholders of Rondell from January through April 30th. But on May 1st, Elizabeth sells all of her stock to Marshall. So from the corporation standpoint, their E&P doesn't change because the stock was sold from one to the other, but the characterization of how it impacts the shareholder does change because it's a different shareholder, so they have different bases. But this is just asking us from the corporate standpoint, but we have to look at it to see what at the time of each of these distributions, what was the E&P at that point. And so Rondell makes two distributions as indicated below in this little table, $42,000 on April 30th and $58,000 on December 31st. They want us to analyze the distributions by completing the table and assume that shareholders have sufficient basis in their stock for any amount that was treated as a return of capital. So in other words, they're saying there's not going to be any capital gain. Anything that is above E&P is going to be considered return of capital for this problem. And that's what they mean when they say, assume they have sufficient basis. Okay, so what we've got is we've got current E&P. This is, they're telling us, is 84,000. And we've got accumulated E&P, and they told us that was 13. Okay, so a distribution made on April 30th for $42,000. We have to figure out how much of it is going to be considered from current E&P and how much is from accumulated E&P. So the rule is that the ordering goes, the first distributions, the E&P that's applied first is the current E&P, but it has to be prorated by all the distributions made during that period. So that 84,000 that they're talking about has to be allocated between these two distributions of 42,000 and 58,000. So between the two of them, we have to figure out what percentage each is of the total distributions, and we'll just apply that percentage times the 84,000 of current E&P. So looking at it, we see they were nice to us on this one. On your homework, it'll be algorithmic, so it's not likely to be as even and smooth, but it's still the same process. So what you do, you take, I think this is in your homework, I'm pretty sure. If it's not, don't worry. You still have to know how to do it. So just make sure you understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay, so in April, it was a $42,000 distribution, and in December, a $58,000. If you add the two together, you see that there's $100,000 worth of distributions for the year. So 42%, 42,000 divided by 100,000, 42% of the distributions are related to April 30th. So we're going to take 42% of that $84,000 of current E&P, and that's how much we're going to consider of the first distribution to be from the current. So multiplying 84,000 times 42% brings us to, I already did it, $35,280. And that is nothing but 84,000 times 42%. And then for current E&P, you always allocate. So the remaining piece of it, 58,000 times, 58,000 means that second distribution was 58% of the total, because it's 58,000 of a $100,000 total. So 58% times this same 84,000 tells us how much we're going to say of the second distribution set is related to the current E&P. So 84,000 times 58%, I calculated that to be 48,720. So we got a third of the problem so far, right? All right. So the part I don't know if we, oh yeah, okay, I see what we did. We have, looking at it, you can tell we have a bit of a problem, or it's not a problem really, but we can't just say all the distributions were dividends. When we look at it, we see that we had 13,000 plus 84. That's E&P total, including the current year and the accumulated, is $97,000. But our distributions are 100,000. So we know there's going to be 3,000 that's going to show up as return of capital. Right now, we don't know which of these distributions is going to be related to until after we go through the process. But we know that return of capital is going to have a $3,000 entry because the dividends exceeded E&P by that amount. Okay. All right. So let's just wait just a moment. Let's see. The first step was you allocate by proration of how much of each dividend was, how much of the total dividends was paid at each point, which we just did, 42% and 58%. And you multiply that times the current E&P. That's how we find it. Then the remainder of the 42,000 for the first distribution, we look and see if we have enough previous year or accumulated E&P to cover the rest of the 42,000. And if so, we're going to call it a dividend across the board. The whole thing will be reported as a dividend. So looking at it, we have previous year accumulated E&P of 13,000. So if our distribution was for 42,000 on April 30th and 35,280 of it was allocated as applicable to the current year's E&P, then we'll try to see if we can take the remainder of it as also a dividend because it was from accumulated E&P. And yeah, we can, because the accumulated E&P is 13,000. And the only part we lack covering is 6720, because 42,000 minus the amount we already said was dividend, because it's in current E&P, 35,280. 42,000 minus 35,280 brings us to this 6720. So the total of those two pieces, the allocated current E&P plus the remainder of the E&P that came from the historical E&P, brought us to 42,000 total, which means we show it all as dividend, and return of capital is 0 for that April 30th distribution. Okay, and then we go on, move on down, and we say, okay, then of the 13,000, we just used 6720 of it and called it a dividend distribution for the April 30th. So the only thing we have left that we can use as a dividend distribution is 13,000 minus 6720, which brings us to 6280. So if you look at it, the second distribution set on December 31st, all we did was we just made up at the rest of the accumulated. We couldn't cover the whole 58,000 and say the whole thing was a dividend because we didn't have a combination of current and accumulated E&P to cover the whole 58,000. So part of it's dividend, this combination of 48,720 and 6280. So what is that? 55,000. So 55,000 is the total of the E&P that we're calling a dividend for the last distribution, 55,000, but hey, we paid out 58,000. So we have 3,000 extra. So what is it? If it's not a dividend, the next thing it would be return of capital. So 3,000 left over means 3,000 was a return of capital. So looking at the whole thing together, you see it jives and it double checks itself, which is typical accounting. This is the kind of thing that makes us cheer and say, hey, I'm a genius, because it shows the very same thing we knew was going to happen. We knew that our E&P was not enough to cover all these distributions we're making. We knew our E&P was shy by $3,000. And so that was going to be a $3,000 return of capital. So when this turned out the way it did, it's just confirmation that, well, that's right. I know that's right. And so the thing you have to remember about it is when you're doing this allocation, you look at each distribution to see what percentage it is of the total distributions for that year. And that's your percentage you're going to apply to the current E&P to see how much should be allocated as dividends relating to the current E&P. That's what we did right here. This current E&P was a total of 84,000. If you look, the part we have under that column, 35,280 plus 48,720 combined is $84,000. And so the two of them together equal the current E&P. And we just allocate it to each one based on their ratio of how much of the dividend for the year were they. So that's for current, but they do it different for accumulated E&P. And what it does is it's based on the earliest distribution would be considered to have used the accumulated as far as it needed to be called a dividend. And so for this distribution, we had a 42,000 distribution. We already had E&P current showing 35,280. So we needed another 6720. So we said, okay, well, we have that much in accumulated. So we're just going to call this entire 42,000 dividend, because it's the total of the current E&P allocation plus the remainder would just be from the accumulated. So the two of those combined is the 42,000. And then we have no return of capital because there was no need for it. It was all considered a dividend. Then we go down to the 58 and we see the allocation we made for current and the remainder of our accumulated, and you add those together, you wind up with 55,000. And you said, okay, 55,000, but I've distributed 58. So 3,000 extra above E&P shows up as return of capital. And that's how the whole thing works. And it's not more complicated than that. It just is complicated when you glance at it, or even when you just give it a stab and don't consider it thoroughly. So just make sure you understand exactly what we just did, and you're going to be fine. Okay.